At 95, Clint Eastwood sits not as the gunslinger, not as the director, but as a man who has lived every shade of love, the triumphs, the heartbreaks, and the quiet regrets that linger long after the cameras stop rolling. In a rare late-life interview, Eastwood reflected, "You don't really choose the people you fall for. Sometimes they just happen to you." Today, we journey through the 6 women who shaped his life, women who inspired him, challenged him, and left indelible marks on the man behind the legend. Some were foundations, some were fire, and some remained whispers in memory. This is a story of love, resilience, and the human heart behind Hollywood's toughest exterior. You're watching Legendary Archives. Subscribe, and let's begin. Number 1. Maggie Johnson. Before the fame, before the Oscars, before the legend of the man with no name, Clint Eastwood was just a tall, quiet kid trying to find his place in Hollywood. And one woman saw something in him that no one else did. In 1953, a young Clint Eastwood was still years away from stardom when he met Maggie Johnson, a college student and model with a calm confidence that matched his own. They married the following year, long before Clint's first big break. Maggie believed in him during the lean years. She waited through endless auditions, bit parts, and long absences when acting didn't pay the bills. When Rawhide finally hit television screens in 1959, fame came fast. But it didn't bring peace. Hollywood changed Clint. Fame brought opportunity and temptation. Behind the charm that fans adored, Maggie began to sense a quiet distance growing between them. Still, she stood by him. Through the noise, the headlines, and the stories that began to surface about other women. They had 2 children together, Kyle and Allison, and for decades, Maggie remained the constant in Clint's unpredictable world. But love built on patience can only hold for so long. By the late 1970s, the bond that began in youthful promise was worn thin by time and fame. In 1984, after 30 years of marriage, they divorced. Quietly, without scandal or bitterness. Maggie Johnson never spoke against him publicly. She simply stepped back, letting the man she once loved become the legend the world would know. She was there before the stardom, before the power. When Clint Eastwood was still becoming Clint Eastwood. And sometimes, the first person to believe in you leaves the deepest mark.
Number 2. Sondra Locke. If Maggie Johnson was Clint Eastwood's foundation and Roxanne Tunis his quiet secret, then Sondra Locke was his reckoning, the love that burned brightest and cost the most. When Clint met Sondra Locke on the set of The Outlaw Josie Wales in 1975, sparks flew instantly. The kind of chemistry that doesn't just stay on camera. Locke was no ordinary actress. Sharp, witty, and fiercely independent, she had already earned an Academy Award nomination for The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. She carried herself like someone who knew her worth. And Clint, the stoic cowboy of few words, was drawn to that fire. At the time, Eastwood was still married to Maggie Johnson, but his connection with Sondra was undeniable. They became partners in every sense, personally, artistically, and emotionally. Over the next 14 years, they built a creative alliance that defined an era of his career. The Gauntlet, 1977. Bronco Billy, 1980, Any Which Way You Can, 1980, and Sudden Impact, 1983. Together, they made films that captured a raw human tension, the same spark that fueled their private life. Behind the scenes, though, their relationship was anything but calm. Friends described them as magnetic opposites, passionate, volatile, and unpredictable. Locke, outspoken and artistic, often pushed Clint to open up emotionally. He, in turn, wrestled with his instinct for control and privacy. Their love was real, but it was also a constant test of who they were and what they wanted. By the late 1980s, the cracks had grown too deep. Locke wanted more: creative recognition, stability, and honesty. Clint, torn between loyalty and independence, began to pull away. When she finally walked out of their shared home in 1989, the breakup spiraled into one of Hollywood's most public legal battles. Locke filed a palimony lawsuit, claiming professional sabotage and emotional betrayal. The case dragged on for years, revealing not just legal disputes, but the pain of two artists whose partnership had collapsed under its own weight. Eventually, they settled privately, and the war of words quieted. But the damage and the memories lingered. In later interviews, Sondra reflected on their time together as a storm, full of light, passion, and heartbreak. For Clint, Sondra was more than a partner. She was a mirror. Through her, he saw both his creative brilliance and his emotional flaws. Through him, she found both inspiration and tragedy. Their love story didn't end neatly, but it left marks on both their souls and on the films that defined them. Number 3. Roxanne Tunis. While Hollywood saw Clint Eastwood as the clean-cut hero of Rawhide off-screen, another story was unfolding, one that would stay in the shadows for years. By the early 1960s, Clint was riding high as Rowdy Yates, the rising star of American television. But behind the camera, his marriage to Maggie Johnson had grown distant. Fame kept him away from home for months, and somewhere along that lonely trail, he met a woman whose presence would ignite a quiet storm. Roxanne Tunis. Roxanne was a dancer and stuntwoman, strong, self-assured, and unafraid to match Clint's intensity. She wasn't dazzled by him, she challenged him. They met on the set of Rawhide and began a relationship that, for the most part, remained out of public view. For 14 years, Roxanne was the woman the tabloids never saw. Together they shared laughter, companionship, and a daughter, Kimber, born in 1964, a secret that stayed hidden from the world for many years. Those who knew Clint during that time said Roxanne brought out a calmer side of him, someone who could put down the persona and just be Clint. But their relationship lived in the space between his growing fame and his public image as a family man. It couldn't last forever. By the late 1970s, as Clint's career shifted from television to major film directing, his private world became too complex to contain. The quiet flame with Roxanne faded, not in anger, but in the acceptance that some loves are never meant to live in daylight. Roxanne Tunis was never on the posters, never at the premieres, but she was there in the years when Clint Eastwood was learning what it meant to live two lives at once: the legend and the man. Number 4. Frances Fisher. After decades of fire and storm, Clint Eastwood finally reached a place where he could rest. And waiting there was Frances Fisher, the quiet harbor he didn't know he needed. By the late 1980s, Clint had been through it all: fame, fortune, heartbreak, and public scandal. Then, on the set of Pink Cadillac, 1989, he met Frances Fisher, a classically trained actress known for her grace, intelligence, and no-nonsense spirit. Unlike the whirlwind romances that came before, this connection felt peaceful. Fisher wasn't intimidated by Clint's legend. She treated him not as a movie star, but as a man, one who carried both brilliance and bruises. Their relationship unfolded gently, away from the chaos of tabloids and premieres. Together, they built a quiet life in Carmel, California, the same coastal town Clint had once served as mayor. From 1990 to 1995, Clint entered what many call his golden creative era. During those years, he directed and starred in Unforgiven, 1992, a film that redefined the Western genre and earned him 2 Academy Awards, Best Director and Best Picture. Behind that professional triumph was Frances, calm, encouraging, and emotionally grounded. Friends said she brought lightness to his world, a steady rhythm to a man used to running on instinct and intensity. In 1993, their daughter, Francesca Ruth Fisher Eastwood, was born, a bond that deepened their affection and gave Clint another chance at fatherhood. He was softer then, more present, more deliberate. Frances and Clint didn't need to perform their love. It existed quietly, in shared meals, in laughter, in the way they co-parented with patience and grace. By 1995, their romantic relationship had naturally come to an end. But unlike past partings marked by tension or pain, this one ended with understanding. They remained close friends, united by their daughter and a mutual respect that time only strengthened. Frances Fisher was never the fire that burned Clint. She was the light that steadied him. In her, he found peace after years of turbulence, a reminder that love doesn't always have to roar to be real. Number 5. Dina Ruiz. By the time Clint Eastwood met Dina Ruiz, he was no longer the restless gunslinger chasing fame. He was a man in search of peace, and maybe, finally, a little happiness. In 1993, Clint sat down for a TV interview in Monterey, California. The interviewer was a young, confident news anchor named Dina Ruiz. She was bright, poised, and unafraid to meet his sharp humor with warmth and wit. That single interview turned into something neither of them expected. A genuine connection that slowly grew into love. Dina was 35 years younger than Clint, but the age gap never defined them. What drew him in was her grounded energy, her sense of calm in a world that had always demanded more from him. For the first time in decades, Clint found someone who didn't see him as a Hollywood icon, but simply as Clint, a man who liked quiet dinners, music, and time with his family. They married on March 31, 1996, in a private ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. Later that year, they welcomed their daughter, Morgan Eastwood, a joyful addition that softened Clint's famously reserved exterior. In interviews, Dina often said that Clint was at his most playful during those years, enjoying family life, stepping away from red carpets, and focusing on directing stories that mattered to him. Unlike the volatile romances of his past, life with Dina was measured and full of mutual respect. She often joined him at events, standing beside him with quiet pride. Together, they balanced fame and normalcy, raising their daughter away from the spotlight while Clint continued his evolution from rugged star to legendary filmmaker. For nearly 2 decades, Dina was his anchor. She brought order, laughter, and emotional stability, something Clint himself once said he'd been searching for his entire life. But by 2014, after 17 years of marriage, they decided to part ways. The separation was peaceful, mature, and deeply respectful. Just 2 people acknowledging that their paths had shifted. Dina Ruiz wasn't a chapter of passion or scandal. She was the chapter of peace. The woman who gave Clint Eastwood a final home, a daughter to cherish, and a sense that maybe, after all the noise, he had finally learned how to live quietly. Number 6. Jacelyn Reeves. Clint Eastwood's life was a tapestry of stories, and not all of them were told on the silver screen. Some threads were quieter, but no less important. Among the lesser-known chapters of Clint's personal history, is his relationship with Jacelyn Reeves, a former flight attendant. Their bond began in the early 1980s, during a time when Clint's life was already complicated. Navigating high-profile romances, legal battles, and a rapidly evolving career. Jacelyn and Clint shared a private connection, away from Hollywood's glare. Together, they had 2 children, Scott Eastwood, born in 1986, and Catherine Eastwood, born in 1988. Unlike some of Clint's other relationships, this one was conducted with discretion and care. Jacelyn and Clint focused on family, providing stability for their children while maintaining privacy around their personal lives. Those who knew Clint at the time said he approached these quieter relationships with the same seriousness he brought to his films. He wanted to protect his children from media attention and create a sense of normalcy wherever possible. A stark contrast to the turbulence of his publicized romances. Jacelyn's presence in Clint's life represents a pattern often overlooked. The men and women who shaped him not through drama, but through quiet support. Alongside Maggie, Roxanne, Sondra, Frances, and Dina, Jacelyn was part of the mosaic that formed the man behind the iconic squint. Someone who could balance fame, artistry, and family in ways few could imagine. Clint Eastwood's story isn't just about the films he made or the awards he won. It's about the people who walked beside him, each leaving an indelible mark. Sometimes loud, sometimes silent, but always significant. Clint Eastwood's life has been a tapestry of love, loss, and quiet devotion. From Maggie Johnson's steadfast foundation to Sondra Locke's fiery reckoning, from Roxanne Tunis's private loyalty to Frances Fisher's gentle harbor, each woman left her mark. Dina Ruiz brought peace and family stability, and Jacelyn Reeves added depth to his private world. At 95, Eastwood reflects not on box office numbers or accolades, but on the relationships that defined him, the people who shaped his heart, and the lessons of love learned over decades. Some were storms, some were calm, some whispered, and others burned bright. Together, they form the mosaic of a life fully lived, a legend not just in film, but in the human heart.